Well, what attracted me to this project was Billie Holiday. I mean, she's an extraordinary American artist, one of the greatest artists that we've had of the last century, and still is. Her life has been a mixture of a lot of myth, maybe a lot of misinformation. And I think as we re-examine her life, particularly today in the wake of the opioid and drug crises that we've had forever, it seems, in this country, and the criminalization of it, how we might have viewed her life through different eyes, knowing what we know about addiction these days. And I think we would have had more compassion. Can you imagine if she hadn't been criminalized and if she actually received the help that she had? What might her life have been had been? But in spite of all that, how her spirit, how her artistry transcended so much in her life, and she still had the ability to share her gift with us. And so I wanted personally a deeper investigation of a little bit of her journey. She's at Emerson's Bar and Grill. Her closest friend, Lester Young, just a few months earlier had passed away. And it was devastating to her. You know, at this point, she's lost her mother already. She's at a point in her career where, you know, a lot of people are not coming out the way they used to. The biggest thing was her cabaret card had been taken from her after she had been convicted of a felony and sent to prison in West Virginia. And she didn't know this until she got out, so she could sing in big venues like Carnegie Hall and do concerts all over the world, but she was not allowed to perform in the intimate clubs in New York City, which was her home and where she most wanted to be. So in this story that's being presented tonight, it's based on the author's, I believe a companion or a friend of the author saw her in one of her last performances shortly before she passed away in the small club, and there were only about 7 to 12 people in attendance. So this story that we're presenting is based on that event. I play Billie Holiday. The story takes place on an evening in March in Philadelphia at a little bar called Emerson's Bar and Grill, where in its heyday Billie performed to usually packed houses. In the story that we're presenting at ICT, this is one of the last performances of her life. She's 44 years of age. About 4 months from the date we're performing, Billie Holiday will be dead. So this is a point in her life where she is really fighting for her life, quite literally. The addiction, she does die of kidney failure, and other complications from long years of drug abuse. But she still wants to sing. In the play, there are lines the author has written, "Singing is living to me." And it really was. It was her salvation. It was a way out. To me, when I hear Billie sing, it sounds someone's whose soul is just trying to transcend the physical limitations and pain and suffering of their own body, of their own physical existence. And in a way, it is so life-affirming to me, her voice. So that's the journey we're taking. And it's also a very intimate experience. I'm talking to audience members. That's why they've moved the stage out, and they've put tables basically in the staging and playing area, because to her, she, her public were her friends. She was a woman that loved to be loved and needed to be loved. So it's about conveying what's happening in her life in that moment and what she's trying to do. That's the story of the night. It's usually, I think, been treated as a musical, but it does, as Wren and I were discussing his particular vision for the piece, and it is a very intimate thing, and usually it can be done with a combo and very grand and very concert-esque. But what I loved about Wren's vision of the piece and his intuition was the intimacy of getting to more the feeling of one-on-one, that, you know, you're sitting down and you're actually having a conversation with Billie, and she's singing to you and with you, and it's bringing back these memories, and it's making you think of other things. So I really like that stripped away. It's just myself and my music director, Stephan, who's wonderful, who plays Jimmy Powers, who's her companion at this time in her life. You know, she's estranged from her husband. She's lost many people in her life that she has been closest to. And so he's her support system at this moment. So it feels more like a play with music because she is a singer, so it's absolutely appropriate to tell the story of Billie Holiday's life. Pressure. You mean to live up to people's expectations? Sure, that could be it if I were focused on that. And initially when I got the part, and, you know, of course, seeing Audra McDonald perform and another dear friend of mine, Deidre Henry, who's performed it. I mean, they're both extraordinary artists and that I admire. But at the end of the day, it's Billie's story that's most important. And for me, it's how can I best be of service to honoring her story, because she's the star of the show. Not me. Billie is the story that people have come to see and hear, and that's what they expect. So that my job is to give the most truthful representation that I can of and to honor and respect her history and legacy, and maybe hopefully dig for something that we didn't know about her, and to find compassion and empathy and hope even in her story. Some songs she didn't receive royalties for. She was paid maybe $75 for the session. And then I was reading her autobiography, and one friend said, you know, Billie, you should be making a fortune off of, I can't remember if it was Lover Man or another song that she had written. I just paid $10 for your album. She was only paid $75 for the recording. So if you think of the thousands, the hundreds of thousands, the millions of people who've bought, you know, she should have been a millionaire how many times over, and, you know, probably had 70 cents in her bank account, or $7, something like that. And she had a roll of money rolled up in her thigh in the hospital bed that was given to a friend of hers when she passed, about $750 from an article that she had sold to a magazine so she could have money, because she didn't have any money. The process of becoming Billie Holiday has been an extensive one. I've worked with two vocal coaches, one for music, Michael Scott Harris, who's been my vocal coach and helping me find placement and support and of finding her sound musically. And I also work with a wonderful dialect coach by the name of Denise Woods, and I met her when I was on the set of True Detective, and she's Mahershala Ali's personal dialect coach, and she also did the coaching for the Harriet Tubman film. So there were resources that she was able to use. Finding Billie's particular sound, she grew up in Philly, is her birthplace. And so there were things that were going on in the 1900s, the flu epidemic. There was also, her people came from, at least her daddy's mother, who lived with Billie when Billie was a child, was a slave from a plantation in Virginia. So there was a particular sound of the African slaves that were taken to Virginia, so the dialect coach gave me some videos of regional dialects. And it's interesting because all the vocal placement of those slaves is exactly the same where Billie's voice is pitched, which is right in the nasal cavity of the mask. And so these Africans have this very particular sound, and also being from the South. But then there's some parts of it that sound like they're from Jersey, Maryland, Baltimore. Then she did living most of her life in Baltimore, Maryland, and then New York. And so it's this mixture of this area that's really interesting and challenging to find. But I think we found a happy balance, because the intention wasn't to do an imitation of her, but people are coming to no one else sounds like Billie Holiday, so that has to be acknowledged. And so that's been a big part of the work. Also the research, watching documentaries, reading books, reading as much as I can about her. And thank God for YouTube, because there's a lot that's documented, fortunately, that we have preserved of her life and her music and her legacy. The spirit and her and the optimism of Billie Holiday, and also her humor. She was a funny lady. I mean, she laughed even at tragic events in her own life. I mean, and it's interesting. A lot of people said our perception of her is, this victim, this person who is certainly, absolutely a victim of racism, of poverty, of being sexually assaulted at 10 years of age, being taken advantage of by men, of managers, of business people, certainly the injustice of the legal system, being imprisoned on narcotics when she really needed help. But I don't think she ever saw herself as a victim. If anything, she said she was a strong woman. If she needed to fight you, she would fight. And she fought as much as she could, as best as she knew how, not having anything past an 8th grade education, not knowing the legal system, always wanting and thinking the best of people, not refusing representation and lawyers. And she would take the fall for drugs when really it was her companions that brought it in. And they had lawyers and they were gone and nowhere to be seen. So, I think she was a really extraordinary, formidable woman. When you think about what happened in her life, my question was, well, how could she not turn to chemical substances or something at some point to deal with the amount of pain and trauma that she was surviving? But, if she had, as I said before, if therapy or help or some type of medical treatment. She was astonished by the help that addicts got in Europe, and she was tempted to stay in Europe. And, that might have been best for her personally and maybe her career. We'll never know. But I even in the way that she tells the stories, and I think the playwright really does capture that extraordinarily well, her sense of humor. And there's a sense of also this cavalier attitude. I think she did everything she wanted to do in her life. Stephan, so the other actor in the show with me is the extraordinary Stephan Terry, who's my music director. He's also my accompanist, Billie's accompanist on stage. And he also plays Jimmy Powers, who is in this show, Billie Holiday's companion at this stage in her life. And it's interesting that the playwright gave Jimmy Powers the same name as her first husband, Jimmy Sonny Monroe. We call him Sonny in the show. And sometimes during the show, by accident, she forgets and thinks it's her first husband, Sonny. And he's got this wonderful quiet strength and just a wonderful groundedness that I think plays so well in the intimacy and the tone of the show. And we also get to hear him sing. And, I keep saying we need to give this brother a show because he's got an amazing voice, and the feel and the spirit of his playing is just, it's just such a pleasure to sing and perform and be on stage and share the stage and this give and take. It's wonderful. Well, the relationship between the singer and the pianist is inseparable. It's as much a part of the storytelling as the dialogue and the words. It's really where Billie lives her best life. She says it is living to her. So it's such an intricate part of this storytelling. This was her gift to us. And also coming down to just having a pianist and someone who's as talented as Stephan Terry. And also Wren is this walking receptacle of music history, even the style of playing and the way that there was a dialogue between the pianist and Billie. Listening to some recordings of Billie Holiday, she had this wonderful way of singing in the shorthand with her musician, where she and the musicians, she's singing in between the solos, especially the way that she and, for example, Lester Young, the tenor saxophone player, it was like the same voice, this breathing together, this heartbeat of music, if you will. It's a whole other energy and entity of itself, of its own, that you're co-creating with someone. So and that's wonderful, especially having the time to work with someone over a period of time. You begin to speak each other's language, and that's what's so much fun. So in this production, Wren and I had a lot of conversations because I performed in this theater before. I did Fences here, and there's a platform, the stage is above, and there's more distance between us as the actors and the audience, but we're in a bar, and she's speaking directly to the audience. And I said, Wren, are we going to move the stage out into? And he said, yeah, it's absolutely. So as you will see, they've taken down the platform. It's just about the stage area, as in a lot of these little joint jazz clubs, only about 8 inches off the ground, no more than a foot. And they've opened up the moat in front of the theater, and we've moved tables down there. So I think there's like 4 tables so we've got room for 8 people. And it's great because then I get to come out and immediately, I have eye contact with people, and I'm getting responses from them. And it's right for this particular production, because she talks about singing to her friends like she was in her living room or in her own home, and loving the intimacy of that. And also I'm able to come out into the audience to a certain extent. I think the lights will only go so far. So because I felt for this particular, the way we were telling this story in particular, it was really important to have that type of intimacy. And to me, the audience is the third character in our production. What I would love for the audience to come away with from our production of Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill is just really a reaffirmation of this great artist that we were so blessed to have on this planet with us for the period of time, for her too brief 44 years, and to really see a triumphant human being. Yes, she was a black woman. Yes, she was a woman who was addicted to drugs. Yes, she was a woman with an extraordinary voice, but she was a woman of such spirit and determination, and to look at her with empathy, and maybe to get us to look differently at what is happening to other human beings like her, like me, like each other. I think it's important for us to share all of our stories, to let us know that we're all in this together. It's not just the other just because someone is different from you. We're born looking different. We come in with different skills and talents, but just to see an example of what's possible, when we connect with other human beings. And I think theater is a great way, as a great affirmation of our humanity, and for so many different people to gather together in a live space to witness someone else's journey, tragic or hopeful or sad or joyous or profound. It's a great affirmation of that, we're all in this together, and to pay tribute to her and to celebrate her, and just to be grateful that we had an artist like Billie Holiday. Why should Southern California communities come out and see Billie Holiday at ICT? She's one of the greatest artists we've had of the 20th century. We're in the 21st century now. She's timeless. There was so much that I didn't know about her before doing this production. And my dad was a big jazz guy, so I listened to her growing up. It's an exquisite production. It's a wonderful evening of theater. It's a wonderful opportunity to celebrate this woman, to relive her music. It's timeless. It's transcendent, and you're just going to have a wonderful experience out on the town. And if you don't go out too often, I know theater is a big deal to get out, get in your car, drive, pay for parking, get dinner if you're hungry, and sit down for 90 minutes. But I know that you will be absolutely thrilled and glad you did.